Hi, Alex. Thanks for joining. And Dr. Falabi, you're here. I noticed Alex is joined, so
Hiya.
good. We're ready to start on the dot of the hour.
Cool.
Hi, Alex.
Hey, how's it going?
Great. I just want to be sure to give you answers. No, normal. Dimeji. Dimeji, Alex is here. Dimeji, Alex is here. Could you give him answers? Yes, so that he can slides.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Excellent.
Cool.
Then also give me access as co-host so that I can manage noise and entries. Thank you very much. So Alex, you'll be able to share your slides. Would you like to try that now?
Yeah, that's right. Okay, hide that. Someone, yeah. Can you see that? Has that worked?
Yes, I
Cool.
said we could see that. I said the lady looks like me. That's a joke. Beautiful.
Nice.
Okay, so Dr. Falabi, in 15 minutes time, it's your game. You just start to run. I'm going to send notices around again and share the YouTube link. All right. See you guys later. Thank you.
fill in. Previously, the system, you would just type the school and they didn't set up
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tuki Afolabi. I welcome us to the Manuscript Hub monthly webinar series. This is the third webinar in the series. And today we'll be engaging ourselves with the title, What You Need to Know About Writing for Q1, an Editor's Perspective. This session of the webinar aims to provide clear guidance to participants regarding handling of manuscripts throughout the peer review process after submission. The presentation will address the following inquiries. First, what criteria do editors consider when evaluating a manuscript? What aspects do peer reviewers focus on when assessing a manuscript? What factors lead to rejection of a manuscript? What factors warrant major revision for a manuscript? What factors warrant minor revision for a manuscript? What contributes to the high article processing charge in Q1 journals? How does BMC Journal support scholars from Africa? To do justice to this topic, we have in our midst Dr. Alex Goodrich, who is an editor at the BMC series. Dr. Alex Goodrich obtained his BSc in Biological Sciences and MSc in Molecular Biotechnology from the University of Birmingham. He also obtained his PhD in Algal Biotechnology from the Durham University. Dr. Alex worked in the industry as a research scientist at a medical development company specializing in developing new immunodiagnostic assays for different biomarkers. He also focused on utilizing biochemical and biophysical techniques to develop seaweed biomass as a feedstock for biofuel production. In his current state as an editor in BMC, Alex is dedicated to promoting open access publishing and reproducible research. Join me this evening to welcome Dr. Alex as he do justice to this topic. Dr. Alex, over to you. Thank you.
Oh, many thanks. Thanks for having me, inviting me. Look forward to it. So yeah, let's get started then. Oops, I've got my timer on. Yeah, so you've already heard a bit about my background, but I've been at Springer Nature as an editor for since January this year, based in the London office, and I manage one biology journal, BMC Immunology, and two medical journals, BMC Oral Health and BMC Primary Care. And as you just heard, my research background is in a mix of biochemistry, biotechnology, and immunology. So I have done a bit of research in industry as a research scientist, making kits for diagnosing autoimmune diseases and cancer. And I did my PhD at Durham University. So today I'm going to start with introducing who we are at the BMC series, what open access is, and then giving us you an overview of our editorial process and what peer review is. And then I'll cover some points on how to prepare your manuscript for submission and how to navigate the peer review process. And then I'll finish with some additional guidance on publishing more generally before Q&A session at the end. So to start, oh yeah, sorry, looking at the wrong thing. So at BMC, Biomed Central, we're pioneers of open access publishing, representing one of the first fully open access publishers in the world. And BMC has been part of the Springer Nature Group since 2008, with a broad range of scientific and medical journals. So I think we've got around 250. Within the BMC, we have 53 open access community-led journals called the BMC series, on which I work, which cover biology, medicine, health sciences, and chemistry. And these journals launched, some of these journals launched in 2000 as some of the first open access journals in their field. And as community-led journals, we have a unique approach to publishing in that we publish work based on its scientific validity, technical quality, and adherence to community agreed standards, rather than making decisions based upon the perceived impact or interest of a study. So what is open access? So open access is a publishing model that ensures free online access to research and articles to the global community without restrictions. So here, all content is published under a license, which allows free reuse and distribution. For example, Creative Commons license, and it can be freely reused and distributed, considering if the proper attribution is given. This could be gold open access, like at the BMC. So when researchers decide to publish in a dedicated open access journal, or you also might hear about green open access, which is self-archiving of research in repositories. And you may also come across some hybrid journals, which have a mix of open access and other subscription model content. Open access is funded by publication fees, which are paid by institutions, funders, and research grants. And the benefits of open access is the increased visibility of research, increased scientific engagement with the community, and free access to science to all who want to access it worldwide, which will result in greater knowledge sharing, increased scientific impact, and help facilitating scientific developments. So firstly, I'll give you an overview of what the editorial process looks like at the BMC. So what happens when you submit a manuscript to our journal? So research submitted to academic journals is typically assessed by an editorial board of subject matter experts who are researchers active in the field. So how an editorial board is structured will differ from journal to journal and in different publishers. But what I can give you is an idea of what happens at the BMC series. So each journal on the BMC series has a full-time editor, in-house editor, like me. It's usually one, but some of the larger journals have more than one, who acts as a kind of editor-in-chief of the journal. So at the BMC, primary role is to support our academic board members who are active researchers not employed by the company, who are responsible for assessing all manuscripts submitted to the journal. So in my role, I recruit, train editors, have correspondence with authors, work on promoting the journal. That might involve organizing call for papers and commissioning content like reviews. We're also responsible for ensuring editorial policies are adhered to throughout the journal, establishing the scope of the journal, and stepping in and helping our editors with manuscript handling when needed. But the bulk of manuscripts submitted to BMC series journals will be handled by the editorial board, who will be active researchers in your research field. So this just outlines what happens, like a life cycle of the manuscript. So at the beginning, we get a manuscript in, and so an author submits a manuscript and the data for assessment. And then we perform an initial check that the manuscript makes sense for the journal it's been submitted to, whether it's in the right format and all the information has been provided. And then an editor would assess whether the manuscript meets the scientific criteria, and then decides whether it should be rejected, sent for revision, or peer review is proceeded with. And here the handling editor will identify and invite peer reviewers to assess and provide a recommendation on the manuscript. And then based upon that, the editor will assess the peer review reports and decides whether a manuscript can be considered for publication. An editor might request revisions to improve the quality of your manuscript pre-publication. So you typically expect 1 to 3 rounds of peer review revisions. And at the end of that process, the editor decides whether the manuscript should be accepted or rejected based on the journal's editorial criteria. Oops. Yeah. So when we receive a manuscript, we perform an initial check to assess that it's suitable for editorial consideration. For example, is it an accepted manuscript type or study we would consider? For example, there's certain studies we don't consider at BMC, such as bibliographic analysis. We also check that everything's been formatted correctly. So our instructions for authors, have they been followed? Is there any missing data or information provided that we need to assess the manuscript? Are there any concerns with the declarations, such as authorship, or should the data be made available? Whether there's concerns with ethics of the study, and whether the appropriate reporting guidelines have been adhered to, which I'll talk about in a bit, and also whether the study is in the scope of the journal. So as I briefly mentioned, at the BMC series, we're a community-led journal, so we consider studies based upon their scientific validity rather than whether the study is interesting or considered impactful. So we consider scientifically valid studies which can contribute to the scientific literature and are technically sound, following community agreed standards relevant to the research field. So once our initial checks are complete, your manuscript will go to one of our editors who will perform assessment on your manuscript to check it meets our criteria for scientific research. For example, is there a clear scientific rationale for the study? Is it scientifically sound? Are the methods suitable and discussed in enough detail? Do the conclusions make sense? And are there any concerns with the research that would prevent us from publishing it? So like missing information or flawed methods. So at this stage, the editor might reject if it's doesn't meet the criteria, or request changes if the criteria aren't met, but probably can be upon revision. And then they might proceed with peer review. So peer review. So firstly, to consider, there are different models of peer review, which you might hear about, which all have their pros and cons. So we've got single blind, when reviewers know the name of the authors, but authors don't know the peer reviewers. Double blind is when neither knows the identity of the other. And there's an open model, where authors know the reviewer identity and vice versa, and the reports are published alongside the article. And transparent model is what we currently have at the BMC series, is reviewers know the name of the authors, but authors don't know the peer reviewer identity unless the reviewer chooses to sign a report. And we would publish all reports alongside the article anonymously. So by publishing these reports, we kind of enable the readers to trace how a manuscript has changed over the peer review process. So this openness might help educate people about how peer review works and provide transparency about how a manuscript has changed, and may also encourage reviewers to be more constructive throughout the peer review process. So who are peer reviewers? So we want at least 2 reports from independent reviewers who are subject matter experts. So whilst we normally require reviewers with publication track record in the subjects, we're always interested in encouraging early career researchers to get involved with peer review. And these peer review reports should constructively evaluate the research, with the purpose of peer review being to make more manuscripts more robust, easier to read, and more useful to the scientific community. So things we ask peer reviewers to assess are: is the paper technically sound? Are the conclusions supported by the experimental data? If there's any further evidence needed to support their claims? Does the analysis make sense as it sounds? Is the data presented correctly, made available as you would expect? Is the literature review good? Does it make sense in the context of the previous literature? And what suggestions do you have to improve the manuscripts through revisions? So these are things that you may want to consider when drafting your original manuscript, which I'll start to talk about now. So whilst I've been talking about how manuscript might exist, we can now go into some of the main things editors and peer reviewers would look for during our process, which might help you to prepare a manuscript accordingly. So going back to the initial assessment, we want to consider things that are determined before research has even started. So to get your manuscript for the initial checks, you'll need to make sure you've double checked everything in the journal, whatever journal you're submitting to, the instructions for authors, and you have all the relevant information. For example, like declarations related to your manuscript. So make sure to include everything related to study design, ethical approval, if you're doing clinical research, clinical trial registration, informed consent, data availability, reporting guidelines, if relevant, etc. Moving more specifically into clinical trials, at the BMC, we require registration of all clinical trials on appropriate registry. Prospective registration, so registration before you start the research, is strongly encouraged. We also consider study protocols, and they should be cited in the manuscript when relevant. And we also look for checklists and evidence that reporting guidelines have been followed, which often indicates that a study has been carried out well. For example, if you're doing systematic review or meta-analysis, we look for PRISMA. And depending on the study type or the journal, the use of certain reporting guidelines and checklists are mandatory for consideration. So when preparing your manuscript and your data together, check that all the checklists and reporting guidelines are are completed correctly, and just check whether it's mandatory for your study type. Another thing to consider is data and your results. So as an open access publisher, we advocate for openly sharing data. So in all our journals, inclusion of a data availability statement is mandatory for consideration. So if you're not presenting the data in the final manuscript, so if you've got a big database, you should make the data available in a supplementary file or an appropriate depository where anyone can access it. As for example, for genomic data, we need deposition of that data is mandatory. There are of course exceptions. So if there's legal guidance or ethical reasons, for example, if there's patient identifiers, we wouldn't request that you share it, but we just ask that you clearly state that in your statement. So when preparing your manuscript and your research, consider how are you going to collect and present your data in your manuscripts and in the supplementary information? How will you make your data available if it doesn't fit in that? How can you anonymize your data if you need to? And just have a look at the data, your journal's data availability policy and criteria before submitting to check that everything is ready. So let's get on to writing your manuscript. So an editor and a peer review will look at this to basically assess that the study you're submitting meets our editorial criteria. So starting with the abstract, we'd want a precise overview of the manuscript within the allowable word limit. Certain study types, you have to follow a specific format. So if any of you are interested in case reports and clinical research, they need to follow a certain format for consideration. And we also ask for some specific information, such as registration numbers for clinical trials. In introduction, editors look for whether there's a clear rationale for your study, a focused literature review that establishes what is known in the literature, so demonstrating that you're available in the field, you know what's in the field, and know how your study contributes to the field. The aims of your study and the hypotheses are clearly stated, and as the previous point, clearly outline what addition your study will add to the literature. For example, why is your study population important if you're doing a similar study that has been carried out elsewhere? So yeah, the editor will be assessing whether there's a scientific rationale for your study and whether your study contributes to the scientific literature. Method section, which is probably the time I spend most time reading when assessing manuscript, is it's got to be clear and comprehensive, that provides all the relevant information to enable replication of your work. If you're following the reporting guidelines, it can help quite a lot because it'll tell you what information you need to include for a specific study type, so that both the editor and the peer reviewers will assess the methods to check they make sense, whether they're appropriate for the study, and if there's sufficient detail or missing stuff that needs to be included. Moving on to the results, we look for the clear presentation, includes information about the methods to make it easy to interpret, make sure the figures are clearly labeled and visible, and try and kind of organize it so it's easy to follow. So if you have a series of experiments, if you order them logically, it'll help a peer reviewer kind of assess your manuscript. And finally, in discussion, we look for a brief summary of the results and your conclusions, how your data fits in with the previous literature, what the study limitations are, and what are the next steps. So the peer review process will assess whether the study results matches the conclusions and whether the study contributes to the literature. One thing to watch out for is kind of not to overstate the findings of your study, because that can be something that the peer reviewers pick up on that or ask for further work to support your claims. So once you've written your manuscript, we'll check the following. Does your manuscript follow the journal instructions for authors? Is everything in the right format? All the figures prepared correctly? The manuscript needs to be formatted as per the journal requirements, and you've included all information that you need in declarations, and all data required for peer review is available, and if relevant, include information regarding reporting guidelines. Okay, just another thing, cover letters. This kind of helps. So when an editor gets a manuscript, they kind of have a look at the cover letter, which kind of helps them form opinion on the manuscript. So it's a way of kind of selling your manuscript to the editor. For example, if you're explaining how your manuscript fits the scope of the journal and how it contributes to the literature. So this might, in cover letters, they usually ask for essential content. So it's confirmation that all authors have approved the manuscript and agreed to submit, and confirmation that the manuscript hasn't been submitted anywhere else. And I would recommend just briefly giving a brief overview of your study, what the aims of your research are, what the study design is, and kind of explaining how the manuscript fits the journal. Example, how it fits the scope, how it contributes to literature, and any comments on competing interests you might have or peer reviewers that you do not feel you want to assess your manuscript. And also, so say you've submitted to the journal and it's been sent to peer review and you get your reports back. You'll get reports from at least 2 peer reviewers who will provide comments to the authors and then independent recommendations to the editor on what they think should be done with the manuscript. As I said earlier, you might expect 1 to 3 rounds for revision. So the job of the editor is to kind of coordinate the peer review process. So involving identifying appropriate reviewers, checking the quality of the peer review reports, and then communicating revisions, peer review comments to the authors. So they might say, like highlight specific comments to the peer reviewers they feel are important, and they might also say, oh, we don't feel this is necessary for consideration for your manuscript. It'll depend. And the editor will also make the final editorial decision on your manuscript. So tips when replying to reviewers is to provide a clear and concise response to reviewers document, which clearly states where changes have been made in your manuscript. So this will kind of speed up the process, and it'll, by basically specifically saying where you've made changes, will help the editor and the peer reviewers reassess your manuscript. So for example, like doing track changes or highlight sections. And occasionally you might have a peer review comment that you might disagree with. So here you would kind of need to make a clear summary of the decision using references to support your point where relevant, to convince the editor of your decision. For example, the reviewer might suggest some analysis which you don't think is appropriate, or suggest you do more experiments which might not be possible. So in those situations, it might be necessary to kind of tone down the conclusions or add more information in your study limitations to kind of respond to that instead of doing that extra work. And then after the peer review process, the editor will make a decision on your manuscript following peer review, and will provide feedback to authors. At BMC, we have a continuous publishing model, meaning the article, once accepted, will be available online soon after acceptance and proofing, which is just like spelling and grammar check. Okay, finally, I wanted to just go over open access publication. So all articles published by the BMC are made freely and permanently accessible online after publication without subscription charges or registration barriers. So as discussed, this is made possible by the article processing charges which are paid on acceptance of the manuscript by authors, institutional funders. That covers the publication services provided. So at Springer Nature, it's important that editors have editorial independence from decisions on ABC pricing and waivers and decisions, so not to compromise the integrity of the peer review process. So as an editor, I'm unable to give an extensive insight into a policy, but Springer Nature annually reviews APC prices across our journals to ensure our pricing remains consistent and fair for authors. And I've also going to link you to some resources which kind of outlines the information support on available funding options and waivers. For example, authors from countries defined by the World Bank as low income have full waivers, and authors from countries defined as lower middle income are eligible for discounts. And there's also a policy where we can consider waivers on a case-by-case basis, but that needs to be done at submission. Yeah. So I believe you'll get a file with all these links here, but these are some useful resources on kind of where to look if you want to find out more about submitting. And also, as inclusive community-led journals, we're keen to grow our international editorial boards and engage with a global research community. So in the upcoming Q&A, it'll be great to hear your feedback on what you'd like to see us do at BMC series to support researchers in Africa and to support research in your field and community. So I look forward to that. And just to summarize my main points. When submitting or planning a research, I recommend identifying a journal of interest and check the editorial requirements whilst planning a research. And check the exact instructions for authors for a journal before submitting. The main thing to do is ensure your manuscript's well structured, explains the rationale for the study, and provides detailed methods. So those are the main things that editors are going to be looking for. And then providing clear and concise responses to reviewer points during revisions. And remember, peer review is there to help improve your manuscript. So don't get too disheartened if you get disappointing news, as you always have an opportunity to find somewhere else to submit. I've also put some links here as well, which you should get. Also, if you're interested in finding more about the BMC, there's some resources here. So you've got the Springer Nature Sustainable Development Goal Programme, the BMC series blog, which highlights our latest research. If you're interested in joining into editorial board, we've got some information here. And if you work in any of these fields, we've got a few call for papers across my journals, which might be interest. So feel free to drop me an email if you're interested in any of those. And yeah, many thanks for listening, and I look forward to hearing questions.
Yeah, you're muted, Buki. You're muted. We can't hear you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alex, for this insightful presentation. Thank you so much. In the course of this presentation, you have made us realize that in BMC, manuscript acceptance and publication go through 6 stages. And it starts with the stage of submitting. It goes through initial assessment, editorial assessment, peer review. The peer review could be single or double peer review. And after peer review, goes to revision, then decision and publication. You also made us to understand that for every manuscript that a researcher wishes to submit to BMC, it is expected that we go through the guidelines, and it's very important. And you are able to summarize that For your manuscript submission, you need to identify your journal of interest and check the editorial criteria. It's not only to write a manuscript, but it is expected and necessary for us to check through the editorial criteria. Then we also made us to understand that we should remember to double check exact instruction for authors for a journal before submitting. And researchers should ensure that the manuscript is well structured and it's tend to explain the rationale for the study and provide detailed methods. Then in your manuscript, the manuscript must be able to provide clear and concise responses to reviewers during revision. And we should remember that peer reviewers are there to help improve our manuscripts. You may write a manuscript, it may either be accepted or rejected. Even if it is rejected, it is not that the manuscript is not appropriate, it's not okay, but it's for it to get better. So at this junction, we want to welcome question. If you have a question, can you please drop your question on the chat box? Questions on the chat box. If you have any question regarding this presentation, you can drop it on the chat box. I can see somebody's hand up. Hamza, can you unmute yourself? You can see your hand up. Thank you.
Okay. Can I present my question?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So I am highly grateful for the organizers of this wonderful webinar. First of all, I'm Hamza Abdullah from Federal University of Kashere, Gombe State, Nigeria. I have two questions. But before then, I want to thank the presenter of the programs in terms of Alex Godrich. So my questions as follows. Is it compulsory to always submit a cover letter? Then number two, is the cover letter submitted with the manuscript concurrently? These are the two of my question. Thank you.
Yeah, it depends on the journal, but in our system, yeah, there's like a submission form, and then it asks you to put information when you're uploading your manuscript on the cover letter. So it won't let you submit without that information, if that makes sense. But I'm not sure if it at non-Springer Nature journals, whether it would be different. But if you're submitting to Springer Nature, yeah, it'll be concurrent.
Any other question? Any other question? I have some comments here.
I have a comment. Ma.
All right, go ahead.
My comment is regarding, if possible, to help us with the presentation with the PowerPoints, if possible, ma. Either through this platform or through the writing hub. I don't know if possible. That is my request. Thank you.
Yes, you can get the recording and get it through the YouTube. The link to the YouTube is already, check the chat box. The link to the YouTube is already pasted on the chat box. I have some very fantastic comments here. Thank you, Dr. Alex, for this insightful teaching. Thank you, Alex, for this insightful presentation. Nice presentation. I suggest when next such webinar is to be organized, the host should consider using a platform that will accommodate participants above 100. Yes, there's a link, there's a YouTube link. For those who are not able to join on the Zoom, there's a YouTube link. There's a question here, Dr. Alex. Please, why is the cover letter important? We talked about the cover letter in the course of this presentation. Why is it important?
Well, there's two things. Basically, it's the kind of first one is to confirm that all the authors have agreed to submit the manuscript, but it's not essential, but it kind of helps make things a bit quicker. So if you kind of give a brief overview of the manuscript, it kind of explains what the editor is about to read, which might help them understand some of how your manuscript meets like our main criteria. So I'd recommend including information on how your study contributes to literature and how it meets the criteria of the journal. So if the editor kind of reads that like before they read the manuscript, it kind of makes it a bit easier for them to kind of not misunderstand your study and kind of proceed through peer review process.
Okay. Thank you very much for that question. I have another question here, Alex. Please, can you throw more light on data sharing statements? There's a question from Dr. Philip. Please throw some light on data sharing statements.
Okay, so it's essentially just a statement that says where you can find associated data with your study. So for example, like the raw data, or if you've done a questionnaire and you have loads of answers in like a spreadsheet, or if you have genomic data, it either says where you can find the data, how you can access it, or the reasons why you can't access it. And in some cases, it might just be, you can, I can't remember the exact wording, but essentially the authors have the data and they'll send it to you if you ask them. It's just to show that the data is available if needed.
All right, I have a similar question. Is it compulsory that all submitted manuscripts to BMC requires data deposition?
Not all manuscripts. Depends on the study. So if it's a genomic study, so if you got sequence data, if you work in genomics, you would need to upload that to a appropriate depository. It depends on the study. If you look at the editorial criteria for the journal, it'll kind of show you what kind of what studies we would require that data for, but it's not all for all manuscripts.
Okay, thank you very much. There are comments here. Thanks, Alex, for sharing all this useful info. Thanks to the organizers. Thanks, Dr. Alex, for the wonderful presentation. Thanks to Dr. Alex and to the organizer for the presentation. Yeah. Thanks for the educative presentation. There's a question here. How can authors address concern with buyer's review if there is any need to deal with such concern?
So in the first instance, the response to reviewers. So I think remembering that it's not the reviewers who are making a decision on the manuscript. The reviewers are giving a recommendation to the viewer. So in your response to reviewers, you can kind of list your, if you have a file, submit a supplementary document with a response to the reviewer's file, and you respond to each point made by the reviewer, and you can kind of debate your point and convince the author that they're not the author, sorry, the editor, that you disagree with the reviewer's opinion and explaining why you think that way. And then if there's further concerns afterwards, we do have an appeal policy where you can kind of, if you feel like a reviewer has been biased and that's affected the decision on your manuscript, you do have the opportunity to kind of get a second opinion on your submission.
So as a researcher, I can write to the appeal policy to seek a second reviewer's opinion. Another reviewer's opinion.
If the manuscript's been rejected, yeah, but in the first instance, you would try and convince the editor that of your point of view.
I have another question from
Okay.
Professor Morenike. When you have a reviewer asking you to use references that are not directly relevant to your study, how do you deal with this?
Our policy at BMC is that we, for when references are included, we basically, essentially, we don't want reviewers to be recommending references. So if they're not relevant to the study, we don't. So COPE guidelines recommend that reviewers do not recommend references. So if reviewers ask you to use references and you haven't used it, it shouldn't impact your your editorial decision on your manuscript. And that's also another good way of using the response to reviewer file and saying we've considered these references, but they're not relevant to our study. As such, we haven't included them.
Thank you. I have another question here. Can we submit manuscript from agricultural, environmental, or BMC series has no provision for that?
I'm trying to remember all the journals we have. I think we do have a few. We do have BMC, ecology, and evolution. I'm not sure about agriculture, but if you have a look at the list or just get in touch and I can have a look and see if there's something where your journal might fit. Yeah, I'm not sure about agriculture, but we definitely do have a journal that would fit environment. But we are launching, at Spring in Nature, we're always looking at launching new journals. So have a look out and see if there's anything in the future that might fit your research.
Thank you very much. I have a question here. In the course of this presentation, you talk about peer review, single, multiple. A question is here, which manuscript is considered more robust with respect to authorship? With respect to authorship, which manuscript is considered more robust? Single authorship or multiple authorship?
We would look at the content of the manuscript rather than the authorship. The only thing where we might consider that is maybe if someone submitted a review on a topic, because we tend to only consider reviews that we've commissioned ourselves. So when people's submitting a review, we'd like to see if they're kind of expert in the field. So that would be an occasion where we would consider, is the authorship group experienced enough to write a comprehensive review on this subject? But for research articles, it wouldn't. We look at the content of the manuscript rather than the authorship.
Thank you. Before we take the next question, Professor Morenike, Ma, I can see your hand up. Over to you, Ma. You have the floor.
Apologies, it is an old hand. You asked the question. Sorry, I'll wait now.
Okay, thank you very much, Ma. Alex, there's a question here and it's applicable to every one of us here. Most studies or research done in this part of the world, the LMIC, are financed out of pocket. Are there special waiver arrangements for authors from this part of the country, from BMC?
Yes, so the Spring in Nature policy, if you look at the waiver policy here, Springer Nature do have waivers for authors in text. Yeah, so countries defined as low income have full waivers, and authors from lower middle income countries are eligible for discounts. And we also have a policy for, we consider waivers on a case by case basis, based upon financial need. So if you have a look at the resources, there'll be some more information on how to get that and how to request that.
Thank you. Another question, is it compulsory to use a theoretical framework to develop the introduction of manuscripts submitted to P1 journals? That's from Professor Morento.
No, not at the BMC series. We just look for good structure and good literature review, and basically the main points I discussed. So, are the aims of the study well stated? Do the authors know about the literature? Is there a clear hypothesis? And do the authors know how their research will contribute to the literature? So I wouldn't say that was compulsory.
Okay, thank you. Does BMC have MOU to build scientific capacity to early career researchers of some institutions?
What's MOU?
To build scientific capacity of early career researchers of some institutions. Does BMC have capacity MOU for this?
MOU is Memorandum of Understanding.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
I was just lost me there. I'm not sure at the moment. If you drop me an email, I'll have a look and I'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything at the moment.
Thank you very much. And maybe the last question, does BMC have provision for parasitology and entomology researches?
BMC series. It depends what the field is. I think we would accept parasitology. We have infectious diseases. Entomology. What do we have? Maybe ecology. But have a look at the journals that we have on our site, because we've got 50 of them. We're primarily like medical and biology journals. But yeah, we might have a home for that research, depending on the nature of the study.
Okay, thank you. Does BMC welcome secondary data analysis? Also, do you publish country-specific research in BMC series?
Secondary data analysis.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think we have a specific policy on that. I think the authors would need to clarify basically the need for the study and kind of why that study is relevant. So just make sure it fits within our editorial criteria. So whether the secondary analysis basically contributes to the literature. Regarding the second question, country-specific research, yes, we do, but depending on whether it meets the literature. So, for example, if there's a study done in one country, one institution, and there's another study in a different region, publishing basically the same outcomes, we would need to have an explanation on why assessment in that specific region is needed, where if we already have the findings, from another study which kind of shows the same thing. So you would just need to clarify how your research contributes to literature in that regard.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alex. We really appreciate you for your time and for these insightful presentations. I'm sure very soon we will be receiving more manuscripts from this part of the country. DFC will begin to, now we now know what to do and we'll begin to key into it. Thank you very much, Dr. Alex.
Thanks.
I really also want to appreciate everyone attending this program today. Thank you for joining us on Manuscript Hub Space. This Manuscript Writing Hub is a space created to support manuscript writing. It is a platform for researchers to come together, exchange knowledge, and learn from experienced individuals. As part of this endeavor, we organize a monthly webinar series. And like I said earlier, this is a third series. And the next one comes up in July. Please watch out for the July edition. And if you wish to join this space, join us on this space, the link to join is posted on the chats. On the chats, the link is posted. Just click on it to be added to the group. Thank you everyone for your time today. I'm sure we've been enlightened about manuscript writing, manuscript submission and publication, especially with BMC series. Thank you for your time. Yes, the material will get across to you. Yes, you can drop your email. And if you want to join this space, the link to join is posted on the chat box. Kindly check and click on it. Thank you so much. We appreciate our speakers, participants. Thank you very much. We look forward to July edition of the program. The dates and the time for the July edition will be posted soon. Thank you for joining us. I'm sure you have a wonderful time. I'm wishing you a wonderful weekend. God bless you, everyone. Thank you all. Thank you very much. See you in July. Yes, the invitation link is pasted on the charts. Kindly join if you are interested. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
And thank you,
Bye.
Alex.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
No worries.
Thank
Bye.
you, Alex.
Yep.
Bye.
Well done, Buki. That was beautiful. Congrats. Well done.
Thank you for the privilege, man.
You're welcome. All right.
Bye, ma.
Bye. Thank you.
Nke Ada dị kpọmulu 4 months. She can't come, he say, wait.